The Bankstown woman kidnapped in front of her own children before her murder last week has been identified as 45-year-old Thi Kim Tran. But 3 days after her shocking death, there is still no one in handcuffs. Late this afternoon, the state government moved to reassure the community that everything is being done to catch these killers. Let's go live now to Samara Gardner, who's got more on this story. Samara, what's the latest?
A bustling suburb in Sydney. The streets look calm, ordinary, and suburban as usual. But on the night of April 17, 2025, a brutal act of violence would shatter that peace forever. This is the story of Thi Kim Tran, a woman who lost her life tragically. She was kidnapped, stripped naked, and brutally murdered with her body left in a completely burnt-out car. Please stay with me as we dive into the story of Thi Kim Tran, who she was, and what led to her tragic end. Like and share this video to spread her story. Subscribe if you haven't to never miss stories like that of Trans. Thi Kim Tran, 45, was a devoted mother. Friends describe her as gentle and caring, someone who loved her children deeply. That Thursday evening seemed routine. Her 2 sons were at home, a quiet night in their neighborhood. But behind closed doors, unknown dangers were already moving closer. At around 10:30 p.m., masked men stormed into Tran's Bankstown home. One of them carried a baseball bat. In the chaos, her 8-year-old son was struck in the head, left unconscious with life-threatening injuries. Another son, just 15, witnessed everything. The home invasion was not random. It was calculated, deliberate, and terrifyingly violent. The intruders stripped Tran naked in front of her children, tearing her away from the only sanctuary she knew. She was forced into a waiting SUV outside, its engine idling under the streetlights. Neighbors heard the commotion, but could not intervene. Within minutes, the car sped off into the night. An hour later, firefighters were called to Welfare Avenue in Beverly Hills. A car was ablaze, its flames piercing the darkness. When the fire was extinguished, they made a grim discovery. Inside the vehicle was the body of Thi Kim Tran. She had been shot, and her remains left in the charred wreck. The sheer brutality stunned even veteran investigators. NSW police formed Strike Force Bushfield, tasked with uncovering who was behind the crime. Within weeks, their attention turned to the Anh Nguyen, a 29-year-old man with alleged ties to organized crime. Detectives believe he orchestrated the attack, leading others to Tran's home and allowing the violence to unfold. On August 28, 2025, police raided a Bankstown unit and arrested Nguyen. He was charged with murder and with wounding the young boy during the invasion. Appearing in court, Nguyen refused bail and signaled his intention to plead not guilty. Authorities stressed that other suspects remain at large. The full story of that night still untold. For Tran's family, the aftermath is unbearable. Her children live with the scars of that night, one physically, both emotionally. Police call the attack rare and unprecedented, targeting a mother in front of her children. Beyond the headlines and courtrooms, her story is one of innocence destroyed by the shadow of organized crime. The investigation continues, but for many in Sydney, the haunting question lingers. How could this happen in their quiet streets? Thi Kim Tran was more than a name and a headline. To her family and friends, she was a mother who worked hard, cared deeply, and found joy in the everyday rituals of suburban life. Living in Bankstown, she raised her 2 sons with quiet strength, the kind of woman who preferred family dinners at home over the noise of the outside world. Her neighbors knew her as polite and reserved, someone who greeted warmly but kept her focus on her children. For 45 years, she had lived an ordinary life, never imagining it would end in such extraordinary violence. Her children were at the heart of everything. She made sure their needs came before her own, balancing the challenges of raising a teenager and a younger boy with tenderness and discipline. The elder son, 15, was stepping into adolescence with all its uncertainty, while his younger brother, just 8, still needed the safety and nurture of his mother's embrace. They were her purpose, her pride, and her constant source of energy. On April 17, 2025, nothing seemed unusual in the Tran household. It was a Thursday night in Bankstown, the kind of evening when the hum of televisions drifted through neighboring homes, and the streets were already beginning to settle into quiet. Inside, Tran's boys stayed close, as children often do, while she prepared for bed. No one could sense that danger was approaching, that forces outside their control had already chosen this home as a target. In the wider city, shadows were moving. For weeks, police would later discover, an undercurrent of organized crime had rippled through Sydney's suburbs. But for Tran, those were distant troubles, belonging to headlines she didn't follow closely. She lived for her family, not the world of rivalries and drug syndicates. In truth, she likely had no idea how entangled her life had become with decisions she never made. Friends who spoke about her after her death remembered her gentleness. They recalled her as the kind of mother who lingered at school gates, the kind of neighbor who always asked after your well-being. She was a loving mother. One community member said, grief thick in their voice. Others admitted they were stunned. How could such cruelty reach someone who seemed so ordinary, so unassuming? Her life, to those who knew her, was marked by resilience and quiet sacrifice. Like many immigrants who built their lives in Australia, she worked tirelessly for her family, hoping her children would grow up with more opportunities than she had. Each small victory, helping with homework, cooking their favorite meals, saving for the future, was a piece of the larger story she was writing for them. It was a story abruptly cut short. Even before the violence erupted, the Tran family was living with unspoken tension. Her husband's world, one that police say was intertwined with organized crime, had cast shadows into their home. But if Thi Kim Tran sensed a danger circling closer, she gave no outward sign. She carried on as mothers do, determined to protect her children and provide them with a semblance of normal life. The introduction to her story is not one of crime or bloodshed, but of a woman grounded in family. That's the life she was living in those final hours. A mother at home, her boys under her roof, the hum of ordinary life around her. It's this contrast, the simplicity of her existence against the brutality of what was to come, that makes the tragedy of Thi Kim Tran so unbearable to reckon with. It began with a sound no family should ever hear, the sudden crash of a door breaking open. In the quiet of that Thursday night, the Tran household was jolted awake by masked men pouring inside. They weren't subtle. Their mission was to terrify, and from the first moment, chaos replaced calm. For the two boys inside, the safety of home evaporated in seconds. The older son, just 15, froze as strangers stormed through the rooms. His younger brother cried out in confusion.
Sandra, the calls for justice are growing louder from those who knew and loved Thi Kim Tran. Pressure is being put on the police and the state government to catch those people who stormed into Thi's Bankstown home last Thursday night before assaulting her in front of her sons, then kidnapping her at gunpoint. Her body was found in a burnt-out car about an hour later. Homicide detectives are leading in this investigation, which includes looking at whether Thi was an innocent victim who has been targeted by gang members. That word targeted was one the acting Premier used repeatedly today.
I would assure the people of that part of southwestern Sydney and the people of New South Wales that the police have told me directly that they're treating this as a targeted attack.
Thi's family are rallying around her two children. Her 8-year-old son continues to recover after being hit in the head with a baseball bat during this horrific attack.
All right, Samara, thank you.
The intruders moved quickly, shouting, demanding, using violence as their language. A baseball bat swung through the air, connecting with the younger boy's head. The blow left him crumpled, fighting for consciousness, his world spinning as blood stained the floor. The teenager watched in horror, powerless to stop them. That image, the masked figures towering over his little brother, would never leave him. Later, investigators would say the boy was lucky to escape with his life. But for him, lucky was a cruel word. Nothing about what he saw that night could ever be called lucky. Neighbors later told reporters they heard noises, thuds, cries, perhaps even a scream. But in those moments, no one knew what they meant. I thought it was just a family argument, one said quietly. Another admitted, if I'd known, I would have called the police sooner. To them, the Tran home had always been unremarkable, the kind of house you pass without thinking twice. Now it was the center of unimaginable violence. Inside, the masked men turned on Thi Kim Tran. They stripped her naked, degrading her in front of her children. The brutality was calculated, a performance of dominance and fear. The elder boy's pleas went unanswered as they dragged his mother toward the door. In seconds, she was gone, forced into a waiting SUV, its headlights slicing through the night as it pulled away. The silence that followed was almost as shocking as the invasion itself. A ransacked home, a boy unconscious and bleeding, another trembling with shock. For them, the nightmare hadn't ended. It had only changed shape. Alone now, they were left with confusion, terror, and the absence of the woman who had always been their shield. When police finally arrived, they found the scene harrowing. Officers later described the older boy as shaken but remarkably composed, recounting details through tears. He told them about the men, the violence, the moment his mother was taken. His testimony would become a crucial piece of the investigation, painting a picture of what unfolded inside those walls. In the days that followed, witness accounts filled in the story. Neighbors recalling sounds they dismissed, relatives describing Tran's devotion to her children, officers piecing together the timeline. Together, they formed a portrait of the invasion, not just as a crime, but as a wound carved into the heart of family and a community. Every retelling carried the same weight. Disbelief that such cruelty could be carried out with such precision in front of innocent children. The SUV sped away from Bankstown.
A man has been charged with the murder of a Sydney woman who was kidnapped from her home and shot dead in a car in April. With more, I'm joined by our reporter Max Tillman in Sydney. Max, what can you tell us?
Good morning, Dan. That's right. Well, 29-year-old Anh Nguyen has been charged with the murder of Sydney woman Thi Kim Tran in April of this year. Now, what police have told us is that Miss Tran was abducted from her home in Bankstown in Sydney southwest at about 10 p.m. on April 17. We understand she was bundled into a vehicle by a group of masked and armed offenders. Now, a vehicle was found roughly an hour later in the nearby suburb of Beverly Hills with a burnt-out body that police identified as Miss Tran, and investigators now believe she had been shot dead. An 8-year-old boy who was also present at the home at the time was struck by a baseball bat in the assault, and he was placed into an induced coma by New South Wales paramedics. And we also understand a 15-year-old boy was also present at the home at the time. Now, police are currently theorising that there could potentially be a link between Miss Tran's husband and a Victorian drug syndicate, a Vietnamese-backed Victorian drug syndicate. Police now believe Mr. Nguyen, who has been charged with Miss Tran's murder, was intimately involved with that criminal syndicate. We understand from hearing from police a little bit earlier today, they will now allege that Miss Tran's husband had been employed by Mr. Nguyen in January of this year in order to work as a methamphetamine cook for that Victorian-based drug syndicate. We understand from what police have told us earlier today, they believe some sort of dispute arose over what the Victorian drug syndicate have effectively accused Mr. Tran's husband of stealing a large quantity of drugs. Mr. Nguyen was then employed by this Victorian drug syndicate to effectively exact revenge. Now, what we've heard from police is that they believe Mr. Nguyen was intimately involved not only in the planning of this crime, but the execution itself. They've described Mr. Nguyen as joining 3 masked offenders in a convoy of vehicles towards that Bankstown home. Police will allege he was the one who knocked on the door itself before allowing those 3 offenders into the home, where they stripped Miss Tran before bundling her into an SUV, as well as assaulting that 8-year-old boy who was present at the time. Now, police have gone as far as not only calling it a callous act, but saying that it effectively breaches a code of conduct amongst criminal organisations to not involve women and children in their disputes. Let's take a quick listen to what police had to say.
This is a threat of violence from a criminal syndicate group that couldn't find the male, so they resorted to family members. We don't see that too often in New South Wales. It's extremely rare, and certainly this organised crime group have I'd say upset a few people out there in the criminal milieu, because this is not the norm. This certainly is not the norm. Family, females, children are normally not involved in these type of revenge attacks.
Now, police are currently hunting for those other three masked attackers. They've described them as a murder crew and believe that they're not only local but are still at large. Now, Mr. Nguyen has been charged with murder as well as grievous bodily harm, and he's facing Bankstown local court today.
Carrying Thi Kim Tran into the darkness. For a short while, she was still alive, a terrified mother torn from her children, her fate hanging in the balance. What happened in that car will never be fully known. Only that within an hour, her journey ended on Welfare Avenue in Beverly Hills, a suburb barely 15 minutes away. The quiet street lined with family homes, would soon become the site of a grim discovery. At 11:30 p.m., emergency calls began to flood in. Residents reported a vehicle engulfed in flames. The fire so intense it lit up the night sky. Firefighters rushed to the scene, the glow of the blaze visible blocks away. Neighbors gathered at their windows, some stepping onto their porches, whispering in confusion. It looked like the whole car was alive with fire, one later said. You could feel the heat from the street. The fire crew fought to contain the inferno, water hissing against metal, steam rising into the cool night air. Within minutes, the flames were extinguished, leaving behind a twisted, smoldering shell of what had once been a white SUV. The acrid smell of burnt rubber and charred upholstery clung to the air, a smell that would linger long after the last embers died out. When investigators approached the wreck, they found the truth hidden within. In the back seat, beneath layers of ash and ruin, lay the body of Thi Kim Tran. She had been shot before the fire consumed the vehicle, her final moments marked by violence no one could justify. For the officers on the scene, it was a moment of silence, the weight of loss settling in even before the paperwork began. Word spread quickly. The next morning, local media carried images of the burnt-out car, a blackened husk cordoned off by police tape. Reporters spoke of a woman's body discovered, but withheld her name, giving the family precious hours before her identity became public knowledge. In Bankstown, her sons woke to a world forever changed, their mother gone, her absence now brutally permanent. Detectives noted the precision of the crime. The burning of the car was no accident. It was erasure. Whoever planned this wanted to destroy evidence, to leave behind nothing but questions. But fire, as investigators know, doesn't hide everything. Forensics teams sifted through the wreckage, carefully collecting what remained, determined to piece together the story hidden in the ashes. Neighbors in Beverly Hills recalled the sight with unease. It was so out of place, one woman said. This is a quiet street. To see a car burning like that, it felt like something from a movie, not our neighborhood. Their testimonies added to the picture. A car speeding in, no one emerging, flames erupting moments later. It was a vanishing act, executed with chilling efficiency. For the police, the discovery transformed the case from a kidnapping into a murder investigation. The brutality shocked even seasoned detectives. A mother taken from her children, her life extinguished and her body left in a burning car. Sydney had not seen violence like this in years. And for her family, the grief was only just beginning. Detectives from across Sydney converged on the scene, their radios alive with updates and theories. Strike Force Bushfield was formed overnight, a dedicated team tasked with uncovering how a mother could be dragged from her home and executed with such precision. From the start, investigators believed this was not a random act. It was a targeted assault, rooted in deeper conflicts far beyond the Tran household. Inside the charred SUV, fragments of truth remained. Forensic experts combed through the wreckage, finding traces of accelerant, bullet casings warped by heat, and the faint outlines of tire marks leading away. These details were small, but they spoke volumes. The killers had planned carefully, though not perfectly. Police knew they had to move quickly before evidence went cold and suspects vanished. Back in Bankstown, the home was transformed into a crime scene. Detectives walked the halls, noting the splintered doorframe, the shattered furniture, the blood stains where Tran's son had fallen. They spoke to the teenage boy, his words halting but vivid. He described the men, the bat, the screams, the moment his mother was stripped and taken. Every detail, though painful, became part of the timeline investigators were piecing together. Neighbors added their voices. Some recalled hearing the thud of violence. Others saw figures slipping into cars parked just out of view. One man reported a convoy of vehicles moving strangely through the street that night, headlights flickering as though signaling. These accounts gave detectives the first threads to follow, suggesting organization and coordination rather than a crime of impulse. Attention soon turned to Thi Kim Tran's husband, Anh Nguyen. While Tran had lived a quiet, domestic life, police discovered her partner was allegedly tied to a Victorian drug syndicate. Methamphetamine production, missing shipments, and whispers of betrayal. These are the currents running beneath the family's surface. Investigators suspected the attack on Tran was not about her, but about him. She had been made collateral in a brutal message to her husband. One name emerged again and again. Anh Nguyen, a 29-year-old man connected to Anh Nguyen's world. Surveillance placed him in Bankstown on the night of the crime. Witnesses claimed he was part of a convoy that led the masked men to the Tran home. More damning still, police allege he stepped aside as invaders stormed inside, allowing them to beat the boy and abduct Tran. It was betrayal woven into family ties, a crime committed not by strangers, but by someone close. Over weeks, detectives traced Nguyen's movements, mapping phone records, vehicles, and hidden meetings. Every scrap of information pointed toward his role as the orchestrator, the one who unlocked the door for violence to enter. The deeper they dug, the more connections to organized crime appeared. This was no isolated tragedy. It was a symptom of a larger war being waged in Sydney's underworld. For investigators, the case was both heartbreaking and urgent. They knew a mother had been killed to send a message, her children brutalized as witnesses. Yet they also knew more suspects were still at large, men who had carried bats, guns, and fire into a suburban home. Strike Force Bushfield's mission was clear: bring every one of them into the light. But justice, they understood, would be slow, and for Tran's family, never complete. In the days after the murder, police presence in Bankstown and Beverly Hills was unmistakable. Patrol cars circled the neighborhoods, officers knocked on doors, and crime scene vans became part of the suburban landscape. The community, still reeling from the violence, watched as Strike Force Bushfield widened its net. Detectives spoke carefully in press conferences, but one message was clear. This was not a random crime. It was a targeted act, and the perpetrators would be found. Behind closed doors, investigators traced phone records, analyzed CCTV footage, and scrutinized financial transactions. Bit by bit, a clearer picture formed. Conversations linked to organized crime pointed back to the Anh Nguyen, the 29-year-old associate of Anh Nguyen. Evidence suggested he had been the one to guide the convoy of attackers to the Tran home, positioning himself as both insider and enabler. Detectives built their case piece by painstaking piece, knowing the public was desperate for an arrest. On August 28, 2025, for months after the murder, police made their move. At a Bankstown apartment block, heavily armed officers descended before dawn. Neighbors were startled awake by shouts and the pounding of boots in stairwells. Within minutes, Nguyen was in custody, let out in handcuffs as cameras snapped from across the street. For investigators, it was the breakthrough they needed. For the community, it was proof that justice, however delayed, was possible. At the police station, Nguyen was formally charged with murder and with wounding Tran's 8-year-old son with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. Detectives accused him of orchestrating the attack, knowing full well the devastation it would unleash. They called him not just a participant, but the architect of the violence. When asked about bail, prosecutors were firm. Nguyen was too dangerous, too connected, to walk free. The magistrate agreed. Bail was denied. Courtrooms became the new stage for the tragedy. Reporters filled benches, scribbling notes as Nguyen appeared via video link, his face impassive. He listened as charges were read out, his voice low when he indicated his intention to plead not guilty. Outside, media microphones turned to police spokespeople, who reminded the public that other offenders remain at large. The arrest was progress, but it was not the end. Legal proceedings began to grind forward, the slow machinery of justice taking over. Dates were set, Submissions prepared and prosecutors outlined the evidence they would bring. Witness accounts, surveillance data, forensic reports from the burnt SUV. Each document told part of the story, a mosaic of brutality and betrayal that they believed tied Anh Nguyen directly to the crime. His lawyers, however, prepared to challenge every detail. The broader law enforcement response went beyond one man. Strike Force Bushfield continued its search for accomplices, raiding properties, questioning suspects, and working across state lines. The murder of Thi Kim Tran had exposed the reach of organized crime, showing how drug syndicates could spill violence into the lives of families. Police vowed to dismantle not just the killer's circle, but the network that empowered them. For the family left behind, each legal update was bittersweet. No court hearing could restore what they had lost. No charge could erase the image of that night. Yet they watched as the justice system took up their cause, carrying their grief into official records and legal arguments. Law enforcement had drawn a line. What happened to Tran would not be forgotten, and those responsible would be made to answer, even if it took years. The impact of Thi Kim Tran's murder stretched far beyond the crime scenes in Bankstown and Beverly Hills. For her children, life was split into a before and after. Before, there were school routines, dinners at the table, and the comfort of their mother's presence. After, there was silence, grief, and the memory of violence no child should carry. Her younger son would wake in a hospital bed, recovering from his injuries, while her older son faced the impossible task of retelling what he had seen to strangers in uniform. Community members struggled to process the brutality. In Sydney's western suburbs, people left flowers outside the Tran home, notes of condolence taped to the fence. Neighbors who once exchanged small talk over bins and mailboxes now found themselves whispering about organized crime and asking whether such violence could ever touch their own families. It could have been anyone, one resident said. That's what makes it terrifying. For police, the case was a sobering reminder of how deeply organized crime can penetrate suburban life. They had seen gang wars, drug busts, and tit-for-tat shootings before, but an attack on a mother in front of her children was something different. Commanders describe it as rare and unprecedented, a crime that forced them to rethink how far syndicates would go to send a message. In the Vietnamese-Australian community, where Tran's family roots lay, the murder sparked conversations about vulnerability and stigma. Many wondered how a woman so gentle, so removed from criminal dealings, could become collateral in a war she did not choose. Community leaders spoke out, urging compassion for the children and calling for stronger protections for families caught in the shadows of organized crime. Friends painted a portrait of a woman defined by love, not tragedy. They remember her devotion to her sons, her quiet strength, her unassuming nature. She didn't deserve this, one friend told reporters. She wasn't part of that world. She just wanted to raise her kids. Those words became a refrain, repeated again and again, a refusal to let her be defined by the violence that ended her life. The reflection extended to questions about justice. Would one arrest be enough when so many masked men remained unnamed? Could the courts deliver closure, or would the syndicates simply retreat into silence until the spotlight faded? Each hearing, each headline, reminded the public that the case was far from resolved. Justice, people realized, was not a moment. It was a process, long and uneven. For Sydney, the murder became a symbol of the fragility of safety. A suburban street, a family home, a parked car, ordinary spaces turned into backdrops of extraordinary violence. It was a reminder that organized crime is not confined to dark alleys or hidden warehouses. It can break into kitchens and bedrooms, tearing lives apart without warning. And yet, amid the fear and grief, there was also resilience. The community rallied, police pressed forward, and Tran's story was told not only as a crime, but as a life remembered. Her sons, though marked by trauma, became living testaments to her love. In every report, in every courtroom, her name was spoken. Thi Kim Tran, a mother and neighbor, a victim of a crime that will not be forgotten. As the story of Thi Kim Tran's murder moves into courts, one truth remains clear. The investigation is far from over. While the arrest of the Anh Nguyen brought relief to many, detectives emphasize that several suspects remain at large. The men who stormed the Tran home, masked and armed, are still out there. Their capture is not a matter of if, But when Strike Force Bushfield continues to pursue every lead, determined to ensure no accomplice escapes justice. The legal proceedings against Nguyen are set to intensify. His first major court date has been confirmed for November 12, 2025, a hearing that will lay the groundwork for the trial to come. Prosecutors are preparing to present a mountain of evidence, while defense attorneys prepare to counter every claim. The court will become the next battleground, where the threads of a complex case will be unraveled before judge and jury. For Tran's family, those dates carry a heavy weight. Each step toward justice is also a reminder of what was lost. Her children face the prospect of reliving their trauma through testimony, while loved ones brace themselves for the emotional toll of seeing her story dissected in a courtroom. Their resilience, though, mirrors the determination of investigators who promise not to rest until all those responsible are held accountable. The wider community watches closely. Thi Kim Tran's murder is no longer just a private tragedy. It has become a public warning. Organized crime, once thought to operate in the shadows, has shown its capacity to strike at the heart of family life. The case underlines the need for vigilance, for stronger protections, and for collective resolve to prevent such violence from spilling into the lives of the innocent again. Law enforcement officials have pledged to keep the community updated. Task forces remain active, surveillance continues, and raids are still underway. Each update serves as a reminder that justice is not delivered in a single act, but through persistence and pressure. The case of Tran has already reshaped the priorities of police in Sydney, sharpening their focus on organized networks that profit from chaos and bloodshed. But beyond the investigation and the legal fight, this story is about a woman who should be remembered for her life, not just her death. It is about a mother who loved deeply, a family torn apart, and a community standing in solidarity. In honoring her memory, there is also a call to action, to remain alert, to demand justice, and to refuse to allow violence to define the neighborhoods we call home. As the November court date approaches, the story is far from over. The pursuit of other suspects continues, the legal proceedings intensify, and the shadow of organized crime remains a challenge for law enforcement and society alike. The fight for justice for Thi Kim Tran is ongoing, and every step forward is one taken in her name. If this story moved you, we invite you to be part of keeping it alive. Like and share this video to spread awareness of Thi Kim Tran's story. Leave a comment below with your thoughts, and let us know how our case has touched you. And if you want to follow more stories like this, stories of resilience, justice, and a pursuit of truth, subscribe to our channel. Together, we ensure that Thi Kim Tran's voice is never silenced, and that her story continues to matter